Welcome to today's LexCast. I'm Ken Lammers, and it is Friday the 13th of January, 2006. Felt a little guilty today for having the American flag back here because, as all of you from Virginia know, today is actually Lee Jackson Day. I looked around for anything Confederate I might have put up, and sadly, I don't have a whole lot of Confederate stuff. They may throw me out of Virginia for admitting that, and they very well might take my degree away from me from Washington Lee School of Law. I just don't have any battle flags or anything. I don't even have the stars and bars around. But I did track this down. Now, I have this primarily more because it's a Kentucky thing than the fact that it's a Confederate thing. But this is from the Kentucky's 2nd Infantry Regiment. I think it was part of the Orphan Brigade. And for those of you who don't know what that is, go read a little history. And anyway, it's your fairly typical battle flag: red, white, red, blue field, a cross, more of a Western cross than the X that you found east of the Appalachians. This was more traditional. This is more the form you saw west of the Appalachians, Kentucky, Tennessee units, that sort of thing. And then, although I don't think you can see it here, it says across the top here, Kentucky shall be free. I have this more as a sentimental thing about Kentucky than I do as a Confederate thing. But since it's my one Confederate own thing, one Confederate thing I own, it's what you're going to have to be satisfied with. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a happy Lee Jackson Day. First story for today is going to be Roger Coleman. I think most of you probably know the results of this already, but the Governor Warner ordered DNA tests, came back and proved, or at least purport to prove, that Coleman was actually the person who committed the crime for which he was executed. Those of you who aren't from Virginia have probably heard about this over the last few days, and how there was the possibility that it would prove that an innocent man had been executed. Those of us in Virginia who have anything to do with criminal law have probably been hearing about the Coleman case for I don't know how long. I mean, I know that I've heard things probably over the last 2 to 3 years about Coleman, and probably further back than that. Coleman was executed in '92, swearing he was innocent. The attempts to get the DNA tested had been strenuously resisted by prosecutors, the Attorney General's office, the office, and the governor for years. Now, I'm not familiar with all the ins and outs of what went on. I'm just kind of giving you an overview of what my understanding is. But it had been strenuously resisted. However, finally, Judge Warner orders the test. Now, my understanding is that there wasn't a high percentage chance that it was going to turn out not to be his DNA to begin with. But I think what happened is, as you go through, it rose to this mythic level where I think a lot of people on both sides probably believed that if it was tested, it was going to turn out that an innocent man had been killed by the system. It didn't turn out that way. It turned out that, in all probability, probably like 99%, there's always that 1% chance that somebody didn't do it, but, he did it. There's been some crowing about this around on different blogs and different places, which I think is unjustified. I mean, the crowing that you kind of see is that, well, this proves that 0% of the people who have had the death penalty administered to them were innocent. Well, no, it doesn't. And anyone who has put a little bit of thought into this knows that by now, and I can't name a person specifically, but you know that someone has been executed who was not guilty of the crime they were accused. And that's pretty clearly been borne out by the number of people who the Innocence Projects and that have gone back and gotten DNA tests for who were on death row and shown that it wasn't them. Keeping in mind that DNA isn't always in every case. I'm sure, I don't know the percentage, but I'm sure there are people on death row where there was no DNA evidence whatsoever who are there because of, who are innocent but there because of faulty eyewitness testimony or, fingerprints that are wrong, any kind of circumstantial evidence that kind of swept them along through the situation. I'd like to think that the percentage of people who have been executed when not guilty is low, but I don't think anyone who puts any thought into it can say that it's statistically improbable that someone who didn't do the crime he was accused of has been killed by the state. I think the probability is there, even if you can't point to a specific case. Our second story for today is something from California. And in California, a man by the name of David Lee Robinson was convicted of several bank robberies and was sentenced to the most that anyone in California has ever been sentenced to. He was sentenced to 1,210 years in prison and 22 consecutive life sentences. And the thing is here, I'm sure that there are a whole bunch of people out there that are going, oh my God, how can you sentence somebody to that much time? Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me give you a little bit of the background here, because that was kind of my first thought too, but then you kind of got to see what's going on here. Mr. Robinson was convicted for his actions in 26 bank robberies in a 3-month period in 2004. He previously had spent 14 years in prison for 30 bank robberies over a 2-year period. So, life in prison, which is basically what this comes out to be, isn't necessarily an over sentence in this case. One other interesting point here is that when he was allowed to give his statement, which, before you're sentenced, Mr. Smith, please give your statement, anything you have to say. Well, Mr. Robinson starts out, it's funny, over there in Iraq, they're looking for weapons of mass destruction when there are weapons of mass destruction over here in the U.S. in every city, Robinson said, referring to crack cocaine. He was on a cocaine binge for this whole thing. And the judge cuts him off and says, I don't want to hear any political speeches. Doesn't let him complete his statement. And just wanted to point that story out, ladies and gentlemen, because of the just amazing amount of time that was given to this man. It could have been, I don't know why the judge bothered to do that. I mean, he could have just said, okay, I give you life. I guess maybe he was mandated to give this kind of time under some sort of sentencing structure, because it's just kind of silly. It's nothing more than an attention grabber to say 1,210 years and 22 life sentences. Because unless, the fountain of youth happens to exist underneath this man's cell, he's not going to make it anywhere near, let's give him 30 years probably. So, that's that story, ladies and gentlemen, and let's move on to the next one. And our final story for today, ladies and gentlemen, is one which comes from the Daily Nation out of Kenya. And it starts out with a relatively, I don't want to say small case that it's describing, because there are pretty drastic results here. But it starts out with a case talking about someone who was arrested. I know I'm going to butcher this name. The name is Ebun Nalwa John, who was found smuggling cocaine into Kenya, and 8 days later she was sentenced to 15 years in prison. For those of you who don't know, there are countries out there that have a little bit more drastic sentences than even our federal sentencing guidelines, as hard as that is to believe. Although I don't know. I've had cases that went over 15 years that were relatively minor. So it might be about the same. Anyway, the story, it's a really kind of interesting story, because it goes through what the different ways in which, the primary way in which mules carry drugs into countries through airplanes. And it talks about how the Dons, who are the bigwigs, have machines which compress the cocaine into pellets. Pellets, and then put it in some sort of plastic bag, condom, etc., and swallow. The couriers are also given injections which discourage them from eating and keep the digestive juices, etc., down, so that it doesn't eat through the material holding the cocaine and kill whoever's muling. Because if you kill them, you probably aren't going to get your delivery on the other side. And anyway, they also talk about there are other places where things can be stored. Males have one extra place, pretty much, and I think we can all figure that out. They talk about how things are shaped into a dildo type shape, and males store in one place and females can store in two places. I'm not going to be crass enough to describe those, but I think we all have enough intellect to figure that out. And it then talks about the limits as to how much a male can carry in his system and how much a female can carry in her system. The average for women is 90 pellets. For men, it's 170, which is, instant death should the bag bust. Now, what Kenya's doing to interdict this, stop this sort of trade, is they're profiling people on the planes and watching them as they come in the planes. Here, I'll read it from the paper. Police normally put on profile passengers who do not eat anything or who only drink water during a long trip. The mouths of such passengers are usually dry on arrival. Crew members and informants on the plane also alert police to suspicious passengers. They are then put on surveillance and their passports and air tickets inspected. One's point of origin is a key factor in the investigations. So I guess if you're from Colombia, perhaps that might increase your chances of having a search done of your person. The steps they apparently take once they've identified you as one of these profile people, someone who's a likely mule, they force you to eat. As a matter of fact, the person who I started out talking about here was forced to eat at the airport. They force you to eat. They keep you for 3 days. They use normal methods of ejection, which would of course be food and water, or perhaps even something to force someone to throw up, although that would seem most likely to cause problems. And then, failing all that, if they can't get it to come out the normal way, they then do surgery to pull it out of the system. Kind of an interesting breakdown of how things are transferred by mules and what Kenya's doing to fight against that. There's more in the article about other ways people tried to get things into the country, including one person who even opened a dress import shop and started importing dresses with huge buttons on them. You know, of course, when the buttons were broken open, guess what was inside? Yep, exactly. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's it for the stories today. Sorry, I've limited it to 3, and I know yesterday I promised there'd be more of a drug orientation. I went through the cases that I had found. You know, there were a couple cases that are worthy, like a, you know, kind of a pithy one-liner. For instance, the Sacramento guy who had his, you know, house set up as a grow house, you know, for marijuana. His house caught fire. He gets caught. It makes for a pithy one-liner in a blog. There's not really any story beyond that to talk about here, so there's not really issues or anything. So I kind of let most of those stories go. I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to do these video logs Monday through Friday, give you a short video log entry. And you know, believe it or not, this is taking me less time than it does for me to blog entries. I don't know why, but it's considering I have to talk to y'all, and then I also have to put it together in video form and do all the stuff, magic that makes it appear. Still coming up a little quicker than when I do 4 or 5 entries a day. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, I think what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to be doing 5 entries a week, kind of like what you see on Rocket Boom or MoBuzz, where during the week you get 5 entries, and in the weekends y'all are going to have to live without video entries. I'll probably blog on the blog itself, but no video for the weekends unless I really come across something interesting. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found something interesting, and well, I hope you have a good day. And ladies and gentlemen, this is Spot. So those of you who see me in court and see blonde hairs on my coat, it's not because I have a blonde-haired girlfriend. It's because this guy sheds like a monster. Have a good weekend, folks, and enjoy your holidays. Bye now.